Leaders have layers, shaped by stories and struggles that are often unseen. In each episode, we peel back those layers, hearing from leaders whose paths may look nothing like yours, yet whose insights will feel strikingly relevant. You'll walk away with fresh eyes, ready to disrupt the status quo. This is Outsider Unscripted. Welcome to this episode of Outsider Unscripted. I'm host Jamey Gadoury here with co-host Sadie. Such excited to have you here listening today. Our guest is Michael Ross. Michael's a native of Connecticut, so a fellow native New Englander like myself. And he's currently the Chief Strategy and Product Officer at Trintech, a software company in the Dallas area. So Michael, welcome. Thanks for taking some time with us today.
Thanks, Jamey. Thanks, Sadie. It's great to be here.
We're excited to jump into just all things leadership, but Michael, we're big fans of stories and where they take us and just having conversations. Would love to start off of just, if you can give us a little bit of who's Michael Ross? What's the origin story? If you're the superhero, what's some about your background that's shaped your life?
Yeah. So Michael Ross, as you mentioned, I grew up in Connecticut. I think kind of, one of the foundational elements, not unlike everybody else, is my family, right? I grew up and the unfortunate part is my folks split up when I was two. My father had some demons that he was dealing with, and that just kind of changed the rest of my experience with my mom and my sister. My mom really had to be very entrepreneurial, very scrappy. She worked a number of jobs, started her own business, and kind of went, not quite rags to riches, but pretty much that path of really struggling to very, very successful, running her own business, having people working for her. And my youth kind of followed that trajectory of, like, we were scrappy and not always kind of having everything we needed to a point where we were eating steak. And my sister kind of went on that journey with us, and she had the unfortunate kind of side effect of she really had to kind of co-raise me because she was a few years older, and my mom was often working one, two, sometimes three jobs. And that was a challenge for her, but she was a great example. But between the two of them, I think the thing that really they both taught me is the value of work, the productive value of work, right? If you lean into work, both it is kind of good for your mentality, your spirit, your soul, and just in general, good things happen, right? It's not to say that hard work is all there is, but hard work is a lot of it, right? And they really were just great examples to me for that. And that's really shaped kind of a value of my life, is that in general, when in doubt, kind of just go back to trying to figure out how to grind it out and generate progress through the work. And that's something I tried to kind of share with my teams, my family. And it's generally been a really kind of core value that's helped drive a lot of success and happiness for me.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael.
Yeah.
One of the things I've, of course, noted about you over the years and is your focus on leader development, your focus on really mentoring is what I see in creating opportunities for people. And was doing the math before this, and we were talking, I think we're about 7 years ago where I met you, and we collaborated initially on a couple of projects and have done many since then in partnership.
Yeah.
And that's grown into a friendship. And I know I've learned a lot from you, both in leadership, in life, in navigating, and maybe we'll talk some of this later, just what we know of ourselves in terms of personality and all of that. But curious, when did you about leadership? When did you start to become aware of you were moving into leadership, or you wanted to lead, or anything? What were the early stories of that for you?
Yeah, there's probably two early stories. One was a company I worked at. There was a guy who was the founder and CEO, Bill Merchant's company. It's called Lakeview Technology. And Bill just was adamant to everybody that he worked for that everybody was a leader, right? And regardless of your job title, regardless of if you had somebody working for you, that you were a leader. You were a leader of the function you did. If you were passionate about responsibility and accountability and improvement, right? That made you a leader. And hearing from him, and this was a guy who had created $100 million a year business, through his effort, his drive, but his commitment to everybody as a leader, right, was a kind of a surprise example to me. Because I had always kind of thought, that leaders had to have a title and leaders had to have people who worked for them and kind of the traditional definition of leader. And that that was kind of one of the early things that really showed me, no, everybody can be a leader if they're so motivated and so sponsored, like Bill did for us, right? And when I worked for Bill, I went from being an individual contributor to at the end kind of being somebody with a title and with a team. And but it was his role model and encouragement, I think, really, that was a great part of that. I think the other example that kind of also taught me a little bit more what leadership was maybe what was a job before that. It was a company called Graywood. It was an insurance company in Tennessee where I went to university, and we're in Nashville. And I got out and I got, kind of promoted. And through kind of a series of unfortunate events, the person who was the CIO had to leave suddenly, and they kind of made me interim CIO. And I thought, well, that, again, back to the value of work, that if I just worked hard enough, that everything would solve itself. And what I realized was that if I and not the other 40 people only worked hard enough, everything didn't solve itself. And I kind of, somewhat failed as a leader in that role, because I didn't yet know how to delegate, how to motivate, how to generate systems and programs. But those two kind of contrary kind of experiences were really the foundational elements of when I started thinking about leadership and how to lead and what it meant to lead and just the different facets of it, right?
Can you say a little more about failure? Because I think we
Yeah.
have this complicated relationship with failure, right? Like where most of us want to talk about our successes, and yet I know we've had dialogue about how crucial failure can be.
Yeah, I mean, so nothing teaches better than doing it wrong, right? And in that example, right, nothing taught me better that hard work on its own, which I'm back to the story we started with. I believe very passionately in hard work and the value of work wasn't enough, right? And failure in there helped me open my aperture and see things differently. And I think the other part of failure is being comfortable that failure can happen and having structures to enable failure to happen without it being catastrophic, right? And this is where I think a lot of new leaders struggle, is they have responsibility for teams and processes, and their fear of the people working for them failing or not being as productive as they could do it inhibits their ability to help those people grow and help themselves grow. And that comfort with that failure can happen, and monitoring for failure, and then stepping in and taking corrective action, but also encouraging people to do things that are uncomfortable and know that they're going to be sponsored and embraced, right? Failure is not just something you learn from, but it's kind of something you need to kind of make space for, not in a bad way, but nobody's going to be perfect. And if you don't let people kind of push beyond their boundaries and fail a little, they won't grow, right? And so I think that concept of getting comfortable, we talked about this extensively over the years, right? Comfortable being uncomfortable, as a leader, as an individual contributor, taking on a new thing, right? That is, in a different way, comfortable with the risk of failure, because that's what it really means, is you're comfortable with that. And you have to both do that in all the different spots on the kind of the team structure.
One thing in that is you're mentioning like younger leaders, in a sense, almost having to learn to be okay with failure or making that conscious choice. I love how you say it, of being comfortable being uncomfortable. One of the things, and we've of course done a lot of work in this, is the use of, whether it's personality assessments or just other ways of seeing ourselves. And so I would love to hear just your kind of at the high level, how that's been helpful to you to use tools, instruments along the course of your career to examine yourself.
Yeah, no, I think that the tools, whether it's Hogan's, which we've used, or strengths, and I probably have been exposed to 5 or 7 different types of kind of tools in my career, right? I think they bring 2 great values. One is they give you a kind of a challenging view of yourself, right? I don't know that I agree with that. Is that right? Is that wrong? And it also can be a confirmative view. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I see that, right? And that helps you kind of look introspectively and, kind of probe on what's going on and why. But I think that the bigger value of those tools are in team settings. And especially when the teams are comfortable sharing as broadly as possible about the data on the tools, right? Because then that can really improve team dynamics, right? Whether it's a manager and somebody who works for them, or just peers on a team. If they know a little bit more about what excites somebody or frustrates somebody or motivates them or challenges them, they can work better together. But it also creates a trust fabric, right? If the people are willing to share that, that starts creating trust models and fabrics that don't just exist about doing a job or doing a thing. They're about now us getting to know each other as a team and working kind of as people who know each other, not just kind of trying to push the rock up the hill. Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
Sadie, what are you curious about as you've been listening?
Yeah, I loved hearing the story, the second story you shared, where your leader was talking about everybody being a leader. And I was curious, how did that
Yeah.
impact you being a part of that team and you growing? Like, how did that make you feel having somebody who
Yeah.
as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was kind of initially shocking, right? Because I thought I had a kind of a review of a leader, and it helped me unpack that. Now, maybe in my first job there, I was an individual contributor. I was a software engineer. The company's role was we made high availability disaster recovery software, and I would go out to companies all over the country and the world and help them set up and implement these softwares, right? So I was just thinking of myself as a guy doing a job, right? But I think that motivated me to think about how do I be the best at this and start teaching, right? And so I can remember one of the things I did there was I created these frameworks for how we implement better and shared those across our team internally, our partners, and try to drive that change. And that was kind of a stepping stone, kind of in hindsight, I think, to me getting promoted, and so it's soon thereafter I was leading some of those teams of consultants, and then soon after that I was leading, these new teams of what was now common a concept of pre-sales engineer, which this is a long time ago. I'm a little bit older, right? Pre-sales engineering and having a team of them and rolling them out globally for our partners. That was new stuff 30 years ago, and I do think it was build motivation and challenge that everybody has a responsibility to be a leader, really just kind of open that door to me.
Yeah, it sounds like it gave you kind of an ownership and a confidence to step into developing yourself.
Well, and also kind of the permission, right? Like you don't have to be, and I think that was the biggest thing, was the permission. You're not your job title. Your job title is this. You're a leader. Be the best at that thing you do. If you're accounts payable, be the best at accounts payable and drive productive change and bring in technology and bring in new systems and whatever it is, right? And I think that was what he gave us permission to do.
Yeah. And I'm sure that affects you as a leader now and when you're leading your team. I don't know if you want to touch on that, of how that affects you as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really spend, I was just actually talking to a guy who works for me this week, a lot of time on is really trying to think about how do we make space for everybody on the team to lead and to take challenging opportunities for growth, right? And it can feel uncomfortable, right? Because again, you have to be comfortable with them maybe failing. It's usually more uncomfortable for the new people when they join the team, because they'll ask, well, what should I do? And the answer is, I don't know. What should you do? Right. And helping them kind of see that mindset shift of, no, you're really here to kind of do more than what you think you can do, and getting them to do that. And then kind of cascading up from an individual contributor to a manager. Managers a lot of times feel uncomfortable challenging their teams to do more, right? And because they feel like that makes them a bad boss. And it's not about making them work 100 hours a week. It's about making them think about the work differently and be willing to take some risks that they wouldn't have previously taken risk. and challenging them to do more, right? And that's uncomfortable for the managers because again, they think, oh, I'm being a bad boss, I'm being too hard, but really no, you're helping. What we try to teach them is you're helping them to grow. If you don't open the door and promote that risk taking, you're kneecapping that individual to where they are today, and you're preventing their growth, which, oh, by the way, is preventing your growth, because when they grow, they're going to bring capacity to the team, which is going to help you then do different things and bring capacity to the team. And that's going to be how you both get promoted and get bigger opportunities that you're hopefully seeking, right?
Yeah.
I love that thread, and I'm thinking about this, the challenge that we so often have, and you can get into the psychology of this, of like locus of control, or what I own versus what you own, and agency. But when I'm going back to what you said about like job title, when I'm my job title, that's entirely dependent externally, unless I have my own business. Whereas
Right.
when I've been invited into, given permission to think of myself as a leader, I can own that from here throughout my entire career. And it's never
Yeah.
dependent on the position. And I can always, in any
Yeah.
environment, think of myself as a leader. I love that.
Yeah. And I hear pretty commonly from, new team members when they join that they find it uncomfortable because it's confusing, right? Like they don't believe kind of that it's really actually there to make everybody better. They kind of feel like it's a trap. And then after a while, they realize, no, there's not any kind of disingenuity here. It's just a model of helping everybody kind of be the best they can be, right? Very cliche, but very true.
As I was listening to the dialogue, I've got to ask about the naysaying side of it and how you respond to it. And what I mean by that is that I find this true even for myself. And I'm in this space of like development and everything else, where sometimes we're trying to get stuff done. And if we slow down to allow someone to fail, or slow down to have a sidebar, or any investment in the person and in the growth that I hear you describing, then maybe stuff isn't getting done at the right rate. So how do you respond to that? How does this pay off from that standpoint?
Yeah. I mean, there's always the tyranny of the urgent, right? Like we have to get this done. We have to get it done now. And truthfully, as a leader, I'm subject to that, right? Like we have business objectives, we have customers, we have board members, we have, right, the boss, and yeah, you have to kind of own the fact, and that, yes, that you're going to maybe operate a little differently, and people are going to think that's, maybe not the most efficient, but have confidence that that it'll quickly prove itself. And it usually does very quickly prove itself. And that's just a strength in a leadership that you have to have on your own, right? And then, the reverse of that is, sometimes it does mean I have to pitch in and do things that maybe I don't normally do, to give space for that. And that's part of the deal, but that's okay, right? Like, because back to the tyranny of the urgency, the business does have time sensitive needs. Customers do have time sensitive needs, and you can't ignore them, right? But at the same time, if you ignore getting your people to grow, you'll fail to meet those needs over time also, right? And it's a balancing act, right? And how I tend to do it, I can think of a project this January, right? We just didn't have capacity in the team for somebody to kind of do some ideation and product launch generation work. And so I just did it. It was, and it was weird for the teams when they were working on that project, because they're like, well, why are you doing this? And I'm like, because I'm doing it. Like, well, it was kind of it was a very junior role of work, but I was like, well, someone needs to do it. Just go do it. And I think that also is like, that's part of the deal, right? You have to be, when you say you have to do things that are uncomfortable. It was work I hadn't done in a number of years. It was uncomfortable for me, but oh well, such is life, right? I don't know. Did that answer your question, Jamey?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Okay.
Thinking too, going back to assessments, one thing I wanted to pull the thread on, we've talked a lot about this, and I've particularly learned a lot from you about this, in the idea of extroversion, introversion. And so we used an assessment that has that kind of dialed in. And often we use those terms culturally, and not everybody always understands it because we're thinking, oh my gosh, like introverts must be living in a cave somewhere and never emerging to the light of day. But it's really about energy from alone time, energy with a small circle, or at least a circle of people, versus being energized by being in social settings. And I've appreciated how you've navigated that as like a fellow introvert.
Yeah.
Will you speak a little bit to that, of like what that looks like in the day to day?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, on behalf of all of my fellow introverts, right, it's not a bad thing. It just is who you are, and it's a thing to be aware of and manage, right? And it also means you can record, video podcasts and speak in front of hundreds or thousands of people and be an introvert. It doesn't have to close the doors, but I think what you're getting at is kind of it does put a tax, right? Like I can think of it, you got a guy, Leo. Leo is an extreme extrovert, right? And Leo and I worked together for many, many years. And Leo would love to walk into a room with 50 people he didn't know. And he'd get a buzz of energy because he just loved to go meet all of them. And I would walk into that room and I would just be like, this is going to be so hard. I have to go meet these 50 people. And it's not actually because I don't want to meet them. Individually, they're all very nice people. It's just honest to God draining to me. Right. And so then, through that, and probably the best kind of experience in figuring out my kind of introversion and how to deal with it was, for a number of years, I was a pre-sales consultant. So I was regularly presenting to brand new groups of people 5-10 times a week. And I just had to figure out, okay, well, there was a kind of a little buzz of adrenaline at the start, and then there's a process, and you do the work, and then you're tired afterwards. Right. And then it's not uncommon to be nervous before. And you just have to make space for that tiredness and the nervousness and not think it's bad. It just is who it is. And so like if we're at events now, and we had a customer event and there was maybe 500, 1,000 customers at it, like if I need to walk away for 5 minutes and go kind of find a quiet corner, that's what I'll do. I don't feel bad about it. It lets me come back and work the other 55 minutes with the energy that I need to bring to that room, right? And it was a phrase actually that when I was doing the pre-sales consulting, is I've kind of worked for the room, right? I would think of the room as who I was working for versus the people, and how do I bring the energy to the room, and it's just a model, right? But again, back to all the introverts out there. Don't feel bad about it. Figure out what you need to do to bring the energy to the task at hand, and then figure out what it takes to recover, and just make space for it, right? And for all the extroverts, like, we're super jealous of you because it seems so easy.
Hearing how you learned about yourself through your strengths and just kind of understanding yourself, and then you adapt to what you need in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been great. Like figuring it out is, like it used to be something I kind of hid. And then, actually I remember one of the first times we did this, at Trintech, and I just told everybody, like, you'll see sometimes I'll just walk away. And now they're like, they kind of look out for it, and they're like, okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes. And like, it's all like, and usually nobody notices anyway, because there's 1,000 people in the room, and like somebody walking out for 5 minutes, you could be going to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah, love that. I often when I'm coaching with an introvert, I'm often saying, and I'll often think of you as I say it, of own it. Just own it. Like get it out in the open, and just it's all good.
Yeah.
And when you're recharged, when you're able to have, like you said, create space, everybody wins.
Yeah.
Right. Because now I come back recharged, I'm ready to go.
Yep.
And we keep moving forward.
Yeah.
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 So let's jump into a bit of the partnership, specifically on a couple of year project that we did together. And of course we had some ongoing work along the way, had some history, but we got to this point in time where, as I experienced it, you observed, I've got a very particular need that I want to hit. And so let's use what we've learned thus far and get after. Can you tee that up for us?
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of, frame it up. It was, I think, 2021. It was, COVID. teams were working remote. And, truthfully, as the team that I was asked to lead at the time, I was asked to take over an engineering team, and it had really struggled kind of in that transition, right? And it had really bad employee turnover, to the point where probably more than half the team, maybe 60, 70% of the team was new. And it had all the kind of things that happen when you have a whole, relatively bigger team. It was a couple hundred people kind of, in a big turnover. And we, so productivity, efficiency, things weren't hitting where they needed to hit. And, I really thought, how do we try to, address this and do it programmatically? Because it was at scale, it was hundreds of people, right? And, I thought about, we needed to clarify the goals and the value. We needed to put programs in place that built up leadership, that reinforced the goals and the values. And this is where, I reached out to Jamey and Outsider and pretty humbly said, like, I've got some ideas here, right? But I don't necessarily have the expertise to do it at scale. And sorry, my dog just walked up. Yeah, go lie down. And so I reached out to Jamey and I said, hey, Jamey, can you help partner on this, right? And, as I think back on it, right, we worked a lot on, goals and values, right? What were the goals of this new organization? How do we get everybody kind of focused in on those goals and pulling on the same rope at the same time in the same direction? What are the values? And then, again, the senior leadership team underneath me, kind of the top 10 or so, were mostly new to leading. A lot of the people, the teams underneath them, were mostly new. And so, and again, it was remote. So we needed to structure this thing. So I remember, Jamey, we came up with this model of these quarterly on-sites, and then we built in activities. I remember I wanted something where people would sweat, right? And we built in charity events. We built in kind of, working through Hogan's, and, and it was great because I would have an idea of, hey, we need to do some type of icebreaker or something. And then how do we use that to reinforce goal? And Jamey would just step in and do it. Right. I mean, he was kind of my partner in every way on the development and the execution of that. And it had great results. Right. I guess that, I'll turn it around, Jamey. Like, what do you recall as kind of different or challenging, from that experience? Because maybe I asked you to do some things that you weren't expecting.
That's awesome. One of the things that jumps out, and I had mentioned this to you, just about the partnership aspect. And I think what I see sometimes is that there's this almost, I guess we could almost say, like an all or nothing when people look at bringing in an outside consultant or somebody to come in and work on an aspect of helping the team or moving toward an objective. And it's okay, we're going to have somebody come in and they're going to walk us through this whole thing, and they have 100% ownership, and then magic happens and we walk away and everything's better. And maybe that happens sometimes, right? You can get effects from, think of like where there's keynote speakers, or there's certain things like, sure. What I see the most value in is the type of partnership like we had, where it wasn't 100% outsider providing a recipe. It wasn't 100% Trintech R&D saying A, B, and C only. It was truly collaborative along the way. Yeah. And like you mentioned, the charity event, it's cool because that was a piece of the offsite. That was an event, and I had zero involvement right in that. And so it really pulled up your team to say, hey, how do we do this? How do we own it? And people did sweat, and I think they loved it. I think it was always a highlight, but there were parts that it was almost like mine, yours, and ours of how it went. There were things that I presented very much in my sweet spot, things that you guys did within the rhythms of the company, and then things that we truly did together. I think that was really effective.
Yeah. And I remember, and we started to scale it the second year, right? Because we started to have kind of my directs at the time start taking ownership on crafting agendas and leading sub parts of it. Because like in the model, Sadie, right? Like we focused the first year on kind of my directs, and that was about 9. And the second year we focused in on the next 20 beneath them that were their directs, or back to leaders don't have to have reports, or people who are leaders who didn't have, direct reports, right? But had leadership roles. because they had roles of influence and impact where people have from them. And we cascaded these skills where we kind of taught the first group, okay, now you're going to have to go out and start teaching these second groups. And it built out these cascading programs of leadership development and a kind of common language. And then again, the whole time, Jamey and I would be kind of, looking at it and talking about what was working and what was not, and ideating, with each other. And sometimes I would pick some stuff up and do it. Sometimes Jamey would do it. It was really a lot of fun, actually. Like, I look back at that experience very, very fondly. And it was kind of, sometimes I, a highlight of kind of, how do you develop leaders at scale? Because we, in 2 years, we built a cohort of probably about 30 or 40 leaders, most of who hadn't been leaders before. Very few of them had formal leadership roles, and they've done great work since.
That's awesome. I know that I'm sure there's a lot more to that, but just to chime in, hearing you kind of having the humility as a leader to reach out to somebody else and bring them in is one of the things that I hear.
Yes.
And then seeing you guys working together where you kept your leadership, like you didn't just give like Outsider has the answer or Trintech has the answer. You guys did that together. And I just think that that's really powerful within leadership. And then you kind of demonstrated it for your team. And then they got to witness that happen. And then you gave them permission. You gave them like space to step into it. It's really, really cool to hear. And so I just wanted to ask you, what is one of the biggest struggles that you saw people having stepping into that leadership since they didn't have training?
I think of, the biggest struggle with leadership when you're leading people is there's this belief that there's this magic set of things you're supposed to do. And if you just do the magic set of things, then everything happens. And there was this book, see if I can remember the name. I think it was Wisdom of the Bullfrog by Admiral McCraven, I think. He's a former Navy SEAL, and I think he was the head of University of Texas system afterwards. But his, like, the book really kind of boiled down to kind of leadership is easy, but leadership is hard. And the duality was, it's easy, like just take a set of steps and do them. It's hard because you got to do them, right? Like the other way I've told people is whatever leadership book you like, just do that, but actually do it. Like just actually do it. Like the trick is the actually doing it. And I think getting people to realize that there's not a bunch of magic secrets. It's just actually doing the work, having challenging discussions around what's working, what's not, inner team conflict, productivity challenges, customer experiences, whatever, do it. Right. Back to, in that book, he talks about like, walk the line, like, go see what your employees are doing in their experience and then talk to them about it and then make it better. Like it's not actually a hard concept, but it does take effort, consistent effort, right? And I think that's what the new leaders needed to see was that like the work, like because a lot of the times we would do the same thing and then we do it again 6 months later, and I think they realized, oh, it's just actually doing the work, like having a program and sticking to it and doing the work. And I think that was the surprise, because I think a lot of people, myself included, think that there's until you realize there's not, like think there's a magic bullet. Oh, I just need to learn how to have X skill in my toolkit.
It's like a grind to it and it's I now hesitate when I use the example, but in Greek mythology, there's Sisyphus or Sisyphus, however you like to pronounce it, but it's this guy that gets punished for all eternity to roll this boulder uphill. And then every time it gets to the top, it rolls back. Terribly negative like story. And yet there's the nugget is that like there's certain things. And I think that like leading our people, communication would be in that category. The second you think that oh man, that magic thing solved it, we're good to go, the boulder's going to start sliding. And it's constant effort, which gets in, we can think of it as grit, we can think of discipline, like all of that. It's got to do the reps. And I guess a more positive example would be any professional athlete. If you see them at the start of camp for the year and the training going into the next season, they look oddly similar to a high school team because they're doing the basics again.
Yeah.
And they keep coming back because that's actually what excellence is based on, is continuing to do those basics.
Yeah. And do the basics and improve them, right? Like it's like, if you think you're, really, really good at something, then you got to work on getting even better, because like you're gonna denigrate, right? And whether it's building your leadership skills, your technical skills, your communication skills, like you just have to, there's about, go back to the beginning, there's value in productive work. Like it's about doing the work, because that effort, I honestly believe, is what brings people happiness.
And Sadie, you said something about, and the way I heard it was like modeling to like the other leaders. And one of the most powerful things that I'll say that we did, but I got to observe like over it, and this gets in the realm of trust and so on, but we would work with, anytime it was a new group or trying to gel the group for the first time, was the telling of stories, like personal history stories, something that we draw on from Pat Lencioni and The Advantage and Five Dysfunctions of Teams, some other works there at Table Group. But there's something about when we push pause on the usual busyness of the day-to-day, the execution, and we sit and we actually are trying to understand the people we're working with. And the way that I think of it is, it's very easy in execution mode to start seeing one another as two-dimensional. And the function that I'm bringing to the table today, I fit into the machine in this way, you fit in that way. It's very easy to slide into that and give be transactional perhaps about it, or even just, that's all I see. And yet we're full on human beings. We come to work as complete people. We don't actually, there's this show on, I think it's Apple right now, of Severance. We don't actually sever the other side of our experience when we come to work, right? We're still whole. And so when we tell these stories, what I saw time and again for Michael and then some of the other senior leaders, they would get up in this room of 12 or 20 more junior leaders and say very like openly, very vulnerably of, hey, here's some things that were hard for me in life, or here's some things I grew through, and here's some things that are really personal to me. And when you do that, all of a sudden we've reset the field. We've reset the table, because turns out my boss is a full-on human. My coworker is a full-on human. The people that report to me are full-on humans. And we can do something with that now as we continue to look at things that we're improving and growing in. But I wanted to observe that modeling of that, I think, was very powerful for more junior leaders to observe that over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a lot of fun. Like back to doing the work, right? Like Jamey's seen me kind of before and after doing a few of them, and like the more you can kind of expose the wound, the better the outcome. But it's not a lot of fun. But it does work, and I think it kind of back to kind of brings everybody to three dimensions, and in some of the work we were talking about, we were doing these things in live and in person versus remote, right? Like, and because it was the time of COVID and that big project we did together, and we were getting everybody together and kind of taking everybody, from behind the screens to in person, and then sweating together, and then sharing about yourself, whether it was stories, or I remember the one thing we would do this, like have everybody tell you your weaknesses and what you're bad at, right? Like, and I would sit up in front and have all my directs tell me what I was bad at first. And like, it's not a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you do the work,
Yeah.
and it has the outcomes you need, right? And it builds that trust fabric. And to use your term, Jamey, makes everybody three-dimensional again, right? And it just changes the paradigm. I don't know how to say it. Like, it sounds cheesy or cliche, but it really does.
They were telling you your weaknesses, or you were sharing your weaknesses?
Yeah.
Both.
They were telling me both. Yeah, you would start off, and then they'd all go around and just kind of whack you about a bit.
Yeah, that sounds very vulnerable, and not a thing that people do at work, where you kind of show up trying to be the best. But I feel like that would make such a space. I think you said trust, of seeing that people see your weaknesses and still accept you and that you're welcome in the space. And that goes back to your point is like fail. You can fail and grow. And it sounds like you guys are really creating that space for that.
Yeah. And it's like, I remember different times, like we've done events and other members of the leadership team have done it, and we've done it with bigger groups. And a lot of times, people see you in the role you have, right? And so I'm the chief strategy and product officer, or the chief executive officer, or the chief whatever, right? And they just assume, and I don't really know why, but that you got there kind of easily, and that your life was not full of bumps and challenges. And then when you share these stories, and I can think of lots of the folks at the leadership team of Trintech who have done this, right? It changes the dynamic, right? And it changes my interaction with them as a peer, but also like the cascading effect of them, us, myself, or others doing it in front of others, right? It's people are, much happier to engage with you when they realize that you had a life too. Like it seems oddly that it's a surprise, but it is, right? Because they just know you as the whatever. You're the director of so-and-so, and that's your job. And boy, that's a bigger title than I have. And you must have had a better life.
And it's interesting to me, time and again, I don't know the exact statistic, but I've observed it's a small percentage, let's say maybe 10-ish% of all groups doing this that I've observed, where someone will say, I feel bad, my life was amazing. And then it's this like incredible, like everything was awesome.
Yeah.
And that's probably less than 10% of people say that. It turns out all the rest of the 90% are like, hey, something happened in life early on, whether that was childhood, teen years, early adulthood, that was hard. Yeah. And I had to really wrestle with it and emerge from that.
Yeah. I mean, the math is that most people don't come from affluence. The math is that most people have challenging family dynamics, right? Like it's just the math, right? And, but we forget because, you don't talk about it, right? And you don't think about that. You just see, oh, well, look, they showed up, they drove a nice car to work, and they must have had a great life. It must have all been easy for them. And it's kind of silly of all of us to think that way. And I know I do too. Like I'm not immune to it.
Yeah. Same. It's interesting, Sadie, as you're talking about like the strengths and weaknesses exercise. I think, Michael, we did some adjustments along the way because you can get there quicker in some groups than others. And I think there's multiple factors that go in. A couple of those are just the personality of the members, the working relationship, and is this peer group, is this semi-peer group, near peer, or is this a lot of junior, senior? And in at least one case, we very deliberately waited. That was almost culmination of a year of work to build enough trust that we can sit and say very candidly about strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. And how I remember, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, like this was the kind of the year two in the cascading leaders, second round, third round, in the org structure of leaders. We did a little bit of the kind of the folks from the first year sharing their weaknesses and getting told their weaknesses by the other folks in the first year. And then we just had the kind of the second cohort mostly talk about strengths, right? And then at the end, we asked them to kind of do it, right? Again, it was a very, I think there was a much larger group year two, right? We were at almost 40 people by the time you added everybody up, right? And so it was sharing in a much bigger setting. But I do remember us getting there. I remember being downstairs on the first floor in that big room, and like Michelle standing up talking about things. I'm like, we got there, and it was pretty cool too, right?
Yeah. And there's lots of levers to pull to make it work for where people are at, but very powerful when you get there.
Yeah. I think that was a great example of the partnership, right? Like we had to kind of just constantly talk about what was working. How do we fine tune it to the next scale, right? Like, back to the expectation wasn't on me or on you to say, okay, here's exactly how we're going to do it. Like, I think coming into year two, I just wanted to do year one again. And I think you kind of said, no, that's probably not going to work. And it's kind of how I remember that. And, we figured it out, right?
Yeah.
I was so happy with year one.
Why did you think year one wouldn't work, Jamey, when you were?
Sadie, great question. I don't remember like that, like the moment, but what I would say I'll name some of the things that I think why maybe wouldn't. Smaller group initially, right? And you have more senior people within the org. As you start to cascade out and involve more people, I think one thing is just the variables have now increased, right? And you have multiple things happening at the same time, which for me, I find that fun because it's 3D chess or like this, you're moving stuff around. It's like juggling or orchestrating. I get energized off that from my strengths finder test would say that's fun because it's not just, and we do this a lot in a training mentality, right? There's a training or education where there's a curricula and you either learn or practice the skills of this program and boom, you're done. Now we do the next group. Now we do the next group. That's not the realm that we're in when what we're talking about here, right? This is the development realm, which is very different. This is actual people are growing. This is actually groups of people are growing in their ability to work together, which is a little less easy to measure. And also isn't just, if you do these 5 things, you're trained and you're good to go. And now we'll send you on your way. And so if I'm a year one cohort graduate and I'm coming in, my growth and development is continuing. And so now as others go through a similar program, that I'm interacting with that, right? So now we've got another variable that's injected that's different from the top one. So I would say just from and that's a good thing, right? Because ultimately it would be a really bad model. It might be a good business model, but it'd be a really bad model for a company to say, we only have good things happen in our growth and development when this outside organization comes in and does it for us. That's not a win to me. That's not good. Yeah. It's comparable to if we say this leader was gone for 2 weeks vacation and everything fell apart while they were gone. They're not leading in a way where they're developing other people and ensuring that their system's in place. That's not a good thing. So what you want to see is more and more going back to ownership, that those who have gone through a level of the program or have gone through exercises and so on, they're taking more ownership. And so I think what we ended up doing, Michael, was that there were some very specific ways that the more senior members took more and more ownership of different parts of the conversations, which was an evolution.
And at the highest level, we had some of the top 2 or 3 people who were my directs, taking ownership on design. Yeah. Like we had challenged them to go design stuff. And then, again, trying to build that muscle of the ability to develop leaders and cascade it, take the work off of Jamey and I's shoulder and, start challenging them to do it and giving them the space to do it. Yeah. I mean, I think that was really it. It was kind of how do we do it at scale? And again, back to, the first year went really, really well, but they don't bend some of them either in official leadership roles for a year. And, they were still really just mastering these new concepts as well. Right? And so we just had to figure it out. I do remember time and time again, people kind of reporting how it was unique and exciting to them to have these opportunities. And to me, it's a little sad that there's not as much leadership development kind of programmatically done in a lot of organizations. I think Trintech's fantastic. You mentioned you've been working with us for 7 years. We have a, CEO and the leadership team back when you joined and still today that's just committed to talent development. And I think it's one of the things that makes Trintech excited to be at. Yeah. Right. And now we're trying to figure out how do we do that and bring AI into the mix, into people's jobs and develop them as leaders and use AI to help develop them as leaders and you help them do their jobs with AI. And it's just kind of this whole new paradigm of thinking and kind of fun that, we're going through.
I, for one, enjoy the AI posts that I think at this point, probably several of your team is making on LinkedIn, et cetera.
Yeah.
Wide open space there. And a lot to learn.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Yeah. 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 And that's back to development and learning. It's just another new thing to learn, right? Like you've got to, our CEO has said time and time again, people don't need to be worried about AI taking their job. They need to be worried about people who know AI taking their job.
Spot on.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So last question on the couple of years leader development program, from a perspective of like outcomes, I think we've alluded to or directly talked to just some of the growth that you're able to
Yeah.
see anecdotally. But what did you see of like measurements in terms of, so a business leader thinking about, okay, do I have an ROI on this that I can report to the board?
Yeah.
How's that work?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so the biggest way, like kind of walking in the door, the problem, as I cited, was we just had incredibly high employee turnover, right? So biggest measure was job one was, employee turnover. And we saw that go from about 30% a year to about 8% a year, right? Or, which was pretty dramatic, right? 30% we were attriting higher than the rest of the company as an org, right? This was the R&D org that I'm talking about. And at 8%, we were attriting lower, right? So it wasn't just the market dynamic, right? Because things did get better, right? If you remember back to 21 and 22, right, it was just a weird time. The market dynamics were really unusual. A lot of people were leaving jobs because there was this kind of, unusual new opportunities, right? So the market, as we went from 21 to 23, sure helped us, right? But what we saw compared to the rest of Trintech, we got, better, faster, and even kind of more healthy from an employee attrition point of view. And then as we looked at the other kind of, statistics, whether it was NPS, Net Promoter Score, that our customers were telling us, like all the other external data went up, as you'd expect when you see kind of an employee, a team kind of mature and grow and roll and get stable. One of the kind of, the interesting things is actually when I knew, kind of back to not kind of quantitative, but qualitative, that we were getting there, is when we started to see, and this was in the second year, leaders proactively managing performance problems out of the business, right? I think the first year, everybody was so afraid, right, that they just left kind of, if you were there and you were showing up, well, they left them alone. But by the time we got to second year, people were raising their hand and saying, this isn't working. How do we solve this? And having those hard discussions, even if it meant, somebody had to leave the org, right? And that's incredibly sad when it happens, but it is a sign of a healthy leadership structure and team structure that, they're caring for the whole by doing the hard work, right? Like it's easy to say, well, if you got a performance problem, you got to deal with it. It's hard to deal with it, right? Nobody wants to have this discussion. They did. And we started to see that. And that was actually a sign of health. It is really hard to say, oh, this measurement is this, but we just saw, better than average employee retention and productivity.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then what's exciting now? What's going on at Trintech that the world should know about?
Yeah. So we didn't talk about what Trintech does. Trintech does financial close and reconciliation solutions, helping customers, companies of all sizes, small, medium, and large, kind of close their books and ensure financial reporting. I hinted toward it a bit ago, not just with our employees and our internal processes and our engineering processes, but, our solutions as well, right? Like bringing out kind of, dramatic improvements in productivity through leveraging some of these newer technologies, in particular the generative AI technologies. We're leaning into that for how we run the business internally and how we service our customers and how we work with our employees and help them skill up and learn it, right? That's what's exciting. And I think that's probably not an unexpected answer of any leader in a business today is probably talking about AI. So I'm not saying I'm brilliant in giving that answer, but it is what's exciting because it is so new and unique. And we're seeing, just kind of small examples. I did a research study that if I had to do it the old way, it would have taken probably somebody 2 weeks, and it took me an hour. Right? Like it's staggering productivity improvements. You can get, not every use case of 2 weeks of work goes to an hour, but you can find them. And then there was another one where Michael on my team, he just created some mock-ups, and Michael's not a graphics design guy, but he went out and found some tools and created some mock-ups, and then he gave them to the mock-up team, and they were like, well, how'd you get these? And he's like, well, I just did it. And it's unpacking these new avenues for creativity and productivity. It's just going to be the next, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 years, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm really excited about it just because I love technology and the productivity it can bring. And and the creativity it can bring. And it's kind of what I've built my whole life on. I've been playing with computers since I was a kid. And so it's just to see a new kind of whole paradigm opportunity is just a lot of fun for me and for Trintech. To answer your question, back to Trintech.
And speaking of back to, who's Michael, the 3D person? What else should we know about you?
What else should we know about back to 3D? So married and I have a son, Owen. He's 19. 2 dogs. One of them you may have seen in the video if it doesn't get edited out. So I really enjoy being partner with Julie. I enjoy spending time with Owen. I enjoy spending time with family outside of kind of work. Anything to do with the water. I grew up in Connecticut. I have always loved the ocean and lakes. Swimming, scuba, kayaking is a passion. And traveled. I've been fortunate for work that I've gotten to go to a lot of places. I'm excited. We have a summer trip to Ireland, and that's a passion of mine. Yeah,
Love it.
Yeah.
As we think about the folks that are listening to this, have gotten to this point in the podcast, what are some things you hope they take away from the conversation?
I think that concept of whether it's everybody's a leader, and then, whether you're an individual, view yourself as a leader, and hopefully you find yourself in a place of work that sponsors that kind of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and everything that means, whether it's, making space for your team to take risks, you to take risks. I think those are key things, and just continue to invest in yourself and what you do, whether it's, reading books, or thinking about leaderships, or taking challenging opportunities. I just continue to put in the time, because, there's a saying, you're either growing or you're dying, right? And I believe it's true, so continue to grow.
And Sadie, a lot of this was when I had lots of conversations in this domain. So as you sit there listening to a lot of it new to you, what did you take away?
Yeah, I mean, we get to hear a few of your stories and seeing how you were taught that you were a leader, kind of from that first leader, or you were a hard worker.
Yeah.
You were taught that you were a leader, and then you experienced trying to do it on your own, even though you had employees. Seeing how you then, grew this team for the company with Jamey. You were vulnerable. You were humble enough to kind of reach out, and then you decided to put in the work to see the bigger picture of developing the team instead of like a short, well, I need to go get this done. You stepped back and saw the bigger picture. And I think just seeing the impact that the decision that you made from that, the decisions that you and Jamey made together to allow yourselves to grow, to fail, to try something new, and to kind of have that space that you got to do together, and imagining how many people you guys have impacted is really cool to think about. Like you changed Trintech, but I'm sure each of those people in their 3D world of like their families and their life, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. So
I love it. And Michael, I'll say, I appreciate just the relationship. Definite blessing to me to know you, to get to know you over the years, and both business and of course on a personal side too. I appreciate you, and thanks for taking time today to chat with us and share some of your lessons learned.
No, well, thanks for doing this. This was a growth for me as well. I've never been video interviewed, so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Sadie, it was a pleasure to meet you, and Jamey, the 7 years we've known each other, and all the time and effort and work and personal discussions have been just a gift to me. So I hope they continue for many, many decades.
Thanks, Michael. Same. And thank you, Sadie.
yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. Follow along on our YouTube, where we release our episodes early. We hope today's conversation inspired you, and we'd love to hear what insights you took away. So please comment below, and we look forward to seeing you next time.